This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, so we're the waning moments of Shavas B'Tammuz. I want to tell you first, just before we discuss the topic, I want to tell you a chiddush of the Rambam. Mamish a chiddush nifla. The Rambam says something which some soifers, mamish, cannot believe the Rambam would say such a thing. In terms of what is the purpose of a tainus. In other words, we went through the whole day. Hopefully we fasted. And the question is, did we fulfill the tachlis of the tainus? So the question is, what is the tachlis of the tainus? What's the purpose of fasting? Other than the fact that it's good, it's healthy. What's the purpose of a tainus? So the Rambam writes in Hilchos Tainiyos, Perek Hey, Yeshem Yamim Shekol Yisrael Mesanim Mehem. There are days that all Jews fast. Why? Mibnei Hatzara Shiur Bahem, because of the tragedies. Kedei, you ready for this? So I would have said, and Lamaisa, all the Rishonim say differently. What's the reason for a tainus? Avelos, Shavas B'Tammuz. 5 tragedies happened. They breached the walls of Yerushalayim. Apostolos burnt the Torah. They, you have the Ched HaEgel. You have the Batal HaTamid, and the Luchos were broken. Nishtabra HaLuchos. So the order actually is Nishtabra HaLuchos, Batal HaTamid, Hufka Hi'ir, Sarafes HaTorah, and finally Hemet Selam V'Heichal, the Mishnah says. So I would have said, what's the reason to fast? It's Avelos. So if I fasted, I was Yotzei. In other words, I went through the day and I fasted, I was Yotzei. The Rambam says no. The purpose of a tainus is Kedei La'oirer Halavavois V'Leftoyach Darkei HaTshuva. The purpose of a fast is to open up your heart to do tshuva. And the Chassam Sofer is Matmiya. Who told the Rambam that's the purpose of a fast day? Pashtus, and all the Rishonim say this. The Ritva says this. All the Rishonim say. The purpose of a tainus is Avelos. In fact, the Gemara is mashma very clearly. The purpose of a fast is Avelos. The Gemara says that when a fast day comes out on Shabbos, do you advance it to Friday or do you postpone it to Sunday? The Gemara says you postpone it to Sunday. Why? Aktume paranusa loim aktaminon. We don't advance punishment. According to the Rambam, you're not advancing punishment. Zrizim akdimim lemitzvos to do tshuva. So the Chassam Sofer says, I guess that Gemara is only talking about Tisha B'Av. But every other tainus, the purpose is to do tshuva. So it just comes out a big chiddush that if we went through the day and we said every word of slichas and every word of tefillah and we fasted, and we could have learned the whole day. If Lamaisa you didn't do tshuva, you wasted your time. You might as well have eaten. Well, what's the point of fasting? Meaning, according to the Rambam, if a person did not look into his actions and change one thing, one small tikkun, whether it's in mitzvahs, whether it's in halachos, whether it's in midos, if a person did not do any semblance of tshuva, they blew it. They wasted their time. So it's important to keep in mind. According to the Rambam, the purpose of a fast day is tshuva. Okay, but that's just, if you didn't do it yet, you still have some time. Okay, so I want to talk about a Gemara. Everybody knows this Gemara. This is one of the most famous Gemaras in Shas. But I want to discuss a question that perhaps you never thought of before. It's like a very fundamental question, a very important question. Okay, the Gemara that I referred to it's not even on your sheet because you probably all know it. The Gemara of Kamsa Bar Kamsa. I'll just remind you the story, but I want to focus on one line in the Gemara. The Gemara tells us in Gittin on Hayamid Beis that because of Kamsa Bar Kamsa, Yerushalayim was destroyed. Right? The Gemara says there was a guy, his friend was Kamsa, his enemy was Bar Kamsa. He made a party. He told his Eved, "Go bring me Kamsa." He brought the wrong guy. He brought Bar Kamsa. Fine. So Bar Kamsa is sitting there at the party, and the master of ceremonies, the person who made the party, said, "Look, I can't stand your guts. Get out of here. What are you doing here? You invited the wrong person." So he says, "Come on, do me a favor. Since I came, let me stay, and I'll pay for my meal." So he said, "No way." He said, "Okay, I'll pay for half the party." He said, "No way." He said, "I'll pay for the whole party." He said, "Get lost." Okay, so he kicked him out. So basically, Kamsa says to himself, Bar Kamsa says to himself, if I was kicked out of the party and the rabbis were there, the Rabbanim were there, they didn't protest, obviously they're going along. They endorsed the decision to throw me out. So he decided he's going to go to the Roman government and tattle on The rabbis. So he goes to the Roman government. He says, the Mardu B'cha Yehudai, the Jews are rebelling. So the Roman government said, Mehechi Tesi. They weren't specifically anti-Semitic. How do you know the Jews are rebelling? So he came up with a plan. He said like this: why don't you send them a carbon and see if they're makar of the carbon? So the Roman government sent a carbon. They sent a fat cow, Igla Tilsa, and while Bar Kamsa was bringing the carbon to the Beis HaMikdash, now the halacha is you're allowed to be makar of the karbanis of goyim, right? The halacha is if a goy sends a carbon, we're makar of it on their behalf, not a problem.
They get the email.
What?
They get first, goes first before anybody else.
We darshan from Ish L'Rabbi Sisad B'Kachavim Shenodrim Nedarim V'Nedavis Kisrael, right? Ki Beisi Beis Tefila Yikare L'Chol Amim, right? So they could be makar. But what did Bar Kamsa do? He made a mum beniv sifasayim in the lip. Va'amrila, and some say bedukin shaba'ayin, and he made a cataract. Duchta de l'didan have a mumo de hulavim. A place that's a mum for a Jew, not a mum for a guy. So in other words, if we would turn them down, it would be they wouldn't understand why we're turning down the animal. Fine. Savar Rabbanan lekruve mishum shalom malchus. The rabbis paskin, we really need to be mak of this carbon, even though it's possible, because otherwise we're going to get ourselves in trouble. It's sakanas nefashos. If we're not makriv the carbon of the Roman government, then it's going to strain our relationship. It could lead to bloodshed. Amar lahu Reb Zecharia ben Avkulas, yoimru balei mumen kraven. Zecharia ben Avkulas says you can't be makriv the carbon. People will say you could be makriv karbanis with a mumenet. Savar lamikdale. They paskin, you know what? Let's kill Bar Kamsa. Why? So that he shouldn't tattle on us. Amar lahu Reb Zecharia ben Avkulas said, yoimru matil mum b'kachim yeharim. People are going to think that if you put a mum in a carbon, the punishment is, we kill you. So basically the Rabbanon issued two psakim, and Reb Zecharia ben Avkulas nullified both. First the rabbis paskin to be mak of the carbon. Reb Zecharia ben Avkulas, who was a Tana, said we can't do that. People are going to say a carbon that has a mum in it, you're mak of it. Then the Rabbanon paskin, we should kill Bar Kamsa because he's causing trouble. He's instigating, he's a roidef. And the rabbi said, no, you can't kill him. Then people are going to say that if you put a mum in a carbon, you get killed. Says the Gemara's final analysis is like this. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, an v'sanusai shel Reb Zecharia ben Avkulas, the humility of Reb Zecharia ben Avkulas, hechriva es beitenu, destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, v'sarfa es heichaleinu, burnt the heichal, v'higlisanu me'artzenu, and caused us to go into Gos. In other words, he was too humble. We'll have to explain, well, it's not humility, it's not mamaratzos. He didn't know the halacha. But that's the final analysis, that his misplaced humility destroyed the temple. So always bothered by one simple question. Reb Zecharia ben Avkulas was a Tana. What in the world was the man thinking? Here, the Romans send the carbon. It has a mum in it. Are you allowed to be makar carbon with a mum? No. Is it yehareg v'al yavar? You have to give up, you have to sacrifice the life of the Jewish people so as not to bring a carbon that has a mum in it? What's he thinking? He doesn't know a simple halacha. Everybody knows v'chai b'hem. If somebody puts a gun to your head and says eat treif, you eat treif. You know how to give up your life. If somebody puts a gun to your head and says speak lashon, right? Let's say somebody puts a gun to your head and said speak by chazar sashatz, then you're allowed to. You're allowed to. If somebody puts a gun to your head and says speak by chazar sashatz, it is mutter. I'm telling you now, it's mutter to talk, right? So also if somebody sends a carbon to the Beis HaMikdash with a mum in it, of course you know how to bring it. But if it means Klal Yisrael is in danger, then you're mechuyev to bring it. So what's Reb Zecharia ben Avkulas talking about? Yoimru balei mumin kraven. Yeah, so it's not one of the big three. It's one of the big three sins. I mean, the man's a Tana. He's not an Amoritz. He's somebody who's quoted throughout Medrash. Reb Zecharia ben Avkulas. What was he thinking? Okay, so I want to tell you an amazing Gemara. Okay, everyone have the question? You ever think of this question? Like, why? What was his... Obviously, his thought process was good because the Chachamim sort of gave in to him. In other words, if the Chachamim were sharp enough, they would have said, what in the world are you talking about? Bad psak. But they fell for his psak. So what was he thinking? What were the Rabbanon thinking? Why did they go along with him? Okay, so I'll tell you Gemara Baba Kama. Tan Rabbanon, okay, you have a sheet? Very important Gemara. There's a yisoid that we learn from the Gemara, mamish yisoid and yadus. The Gemara says like this: Baba Kama Daf Lameches Tan Rabbanan Uchvar Shilcha Malchus Roimi Shnei Sardiyotos Eitza Chachmei Yisrael. The Roman Empire sent 2 centuries, 2 officers to the Jewish people. Limdunu Toraschem, teach us the Torah. So the Romans sent 2 guys to the Chachamim. The Chachamim were issued the imperative, the mandate, teach us the Torah. So what did they do? Kiru, they read. B'shanu, they repeated. B'shileishu, they learned a third time. Fine. B'shas petirasan, when the 2 Roman centuries were about to leave, Amru lahem, they said to the Chachamim, Dikdaknu b'chol Toraschem, we analyze your Torah very carefully. Ve'emesu, and every word of your Torah is emes la'amitoy, chutz midavar zeh, except for one halacha. And what's that? Sha'atem oimrim, the halacha is like this. If you have a shor, if you have an ox, and our ox, your ox, scores your friend's ox, the first 2 times you pay chatzi nezek, right? The third time you pay nezek shalom. You have a tam and a muad. Different ways, with 2 times, 3 times, but there's tam and a muad. The halacha is, if a Jewish ox, meaning an ox owned by a Jew, damages another Jewish ox, you pay. If a non-Jewish ox damages a Jewish ox, you always pay nezek shalom immediately. If a Jewish ox damages a non-Jewish ox, you're pater. Always. And by the way, that's halacha l'maisa. That you're not allowed to steal from a guy. You can't steal from a guy. Ta'as akum also. Genevas akum is asur. And genevas das is asur. But if you damage a guy, you don't have to pay. You don't have to pay. It's halacha. So they said like this, Miman Shach. It says, Ki yigach shar ish es shar reyehu. Which we darshan, shar reyehu v'lo shar akum. So they say Miman Shach. Is a guy Reyehu or is a guy not Reyehu? If a guy is Reyehu, then you should be chayiv nezek shalom. You should be chayiv, chatzi nezek and nezek shalom. And if a guy is not Reyehu, then when a guy damages you, you should also be pater. I mean, you can't have it both ways. Is a guy Reyehu or is a guy not Reyehu? So they said like this. The only halacha we don't agree with is you say that an ox of a Jew that gores an ox of a goy is pater, but shal kanani shenagal shal Yisrael, but a goyish ox that gores a Jewish ox, bein tam, bein muad, masham nezek shalim, that we always pay you nezek shalim and you never pay us. Mimanav shach. I reyehu dafka, is for reyehu is dafka, afilu de kanani ki nagach di Yisrael pater. If reyehu is dafka, then when a guy damages a Jew, he should be pater. In other words, if a guy is not reyehu, if a Gentile is not reyehu, then when a Gentile damages us, he should be pater.
He should be pater.
He should be pater. He's not reyehu. It's not ki yigach shar ish shar reyehu, because he's not our reyehu. Vi reyehu lav dafka. And if reyehu is lav dafka, afilu di Yisrael ki nagach dekani l'chayiv. Then when you damage us, you should be chayiv. In other words, they said your whole Torah is good except for the laws of damage. That when we damage you, that we're chayiv, and when you damage us, you're pater. The Gemara says, by the way, this is not a halacha we tell the Roman government. Just for FYI, this is not something. If you're invited to speak as at the Republican National Convention or whatever, and you want to give, they ask you to announce one halacha of Judaism. This is not the halacha to announce. When we damage them, we are pater. When they damage us, you're chayiv. By the way, Tosfos asks, how could you teach a Goya Torah? You know how to teach Goyim Torah. Is there a Daraisa? You know how to teach Goyim Torah. It's a shaila, how you allowed to put Torah up on the net. I've gotten letters from many non-Jews. How are you allowed to teach a Goy Torah? It was a shaila like 30, 40 years ago. They used to have, when they came out on the radio, Rabbi Tights in Elizabeth, New Jersey, he gave the first Shiur, Matzah Shabbos, of Mishnayos or Gemara. Bottom line is that if the kavanah is for Yidden, then whoever listens, that's in a miskavin. But here, the Chachamim are teaching these 2 Romans Torah. How they're not allowed to teach Torah. So Tosfos gives 2 answers. Number 1, they had no choice. There was a gun to their head. If the Roman government says, teach us Torah, you got to teach them Torah. It's not one of the big 3. You don't have to give up your life for it. Or they converted. They converted first. Okay. Frek the Marshal, the Yam Shel Shloimeh. Mamish, every Jew needs to know this. The Chachamim are very smart. Probably, they knew that if they teach this halacha, that when a Jew damages a guy, we're pater, and when they damage us, they're chayev, they're not going to like it. Not only are they not going to like it, very likely, it could spell disaster. It could spell trouble. I mean, it could endanger our lives. So why didn't they lie? Why didn't the Chachamim say that when a guy damages a Jew, you pay Chatzi Nezek the first 2 times and then Nezek Shalim? And when a Jew damages a guy, also, we pay Chatzi Nezek and then Nezek Shalim. Why didn't they lie? So you say you're not allowed to lie. You're allowed to lie not to endanger your life. Chances are, if you tell the Roman government that when we damage you, we don't have to pay, who knows, there could be libels, there could be uprisings, there could be... This is not a very smart thing to tell the Roman government. So why didn't the Chachamim, why were they not Mishaneh? Why didn't they change? That's the Kasha of Marshal. Take a look at inside. Very Yesodistic a piece. Gam Shaminon Mehai Braisa. What we see from this Braisa is Asur L'shanois Divrei Torah. You cannot say a false halacha. And saying a false halacha is Yeharig Val Yavar. In other words, we know that a person only has to give up their life for the big 3, for Gilui Arayos, for Shvichas Dam, for Avodah Zarah. What if somebody comes, puts a gun to your head and says, make an announcement and tell people, you don't have to wash Negel Vaser in the morning. Negel Vaser. Doesn't say it in the Gemara, you have to wash Negel Vaser. It's a halacha. It's only a halacha. It's not even a drabana. It's not even medina de Gemara. So would you say you have to give up your... Let's say somebody put a gun to your head and said, don't wash Negel Vaser this morning. So you don't wash Negel Vaser. You don't have to give up your life to wash Negel Vaser. But if somebody puts a gun to your head and says, say the halacha is that in 2016 you don't have to wash Negel Vaser, then you need to be Moiser Nefesh al Kiddush Hashem, not to state and misrepresent the Torah even in its minutia. Says the Marshal, why didn't the Chachamim lie and say that the halacha is that when we damage Goyim you're chayiv? The answer is because they were teaching Torah. And when you teach Torah, if you misrepresent an iota of halacha, that's Avodah Zarah. And Memela, it's Yeharig Val Yavar. And the Chachamim were not authorized to do that. In other words, the Chachamim, if they wanted, they could have omitted that Masechta. If they wanted to teach the Romans, they could have taught, Bava Metzia, Bava Basra, Sanhedrin, Makkah, Shavuos, and not given Shiur and Bava Kama.
But they were given over the task to translate the Torah. We said they all came up with the same thought process.
Good kasha. The Septuagint, right? So the Marshal asked that. The Marshal asked on what he just said. What about that episode? We'll see. Okay, so good kasha. Marshal said, right, in other words, how were they able to be Mashana over there if we're saying that being Mashana the Torah is Yeharg Val Yavar? So he says like this. He says, Gam Shamina Mehai Braisa, Asur L'shanois Divrei Torah, Afki Hasakana. V'chayiv Limsar Atzma Yola. You have to be Moiser Nefesh. D'lefi Chad Shinuya, according to one Teretz and Tosfos, Shemalchus Horshal Gazar Aleim, that the Roman government issued a decree to teach them the Torah. Lama lo yiro chachamim shetalil malchus Aleim. Why weren't they afraid of some kind of libel? Isn't it a very difficult thing to tell Goyim that we don't have to pay when we damage them? And they're having they damage us. Weren't the Chachamim worried about who knows what could happen? Befrat, the Roman government, that they were the greatest Soinei Yisrael. They should have lied. They should have said, we're both chayiv or we're both pater. A person is obligated to give up their life al Kiddush Hashem. B'mchas v'shalom yishana hadin have a kakoifer b'taras Moshe. In other words, somebody puts a gun to back in the day, if somebody would go to a Rav and say, we want you to give Shiur that the halacha is that you don't have to tie your left shoe first. You don't have to tie your left shoe first. So the person would be obligated to be moiser nefesh, to announce the halacha, that when you put on your shoes, you put on your right shoe first, and when you tie your shoes, you tie. Tying shoes, it's not even, doesn't matter what it is. If you misrepresent what the halacha is misinai, it's begeder avodah zara. It's koifer b'taras Moshe Rabbeinu. And therefore, the Chachamim were obligated to say it as it is. In other words, they could not mince words. They cannot say, well, nowadays things are different, and nowadays Goyim are different, and the halacha is different. It all depends on the times. If you're given the job to teach Torah, you gotta say it black and white. You can't mince. It's not so bad. It's okay. So the people said, they mentioned the chance. Tainus is a nidcha. You're not chayiv to fast. It's a serious thing to say something like that. It's begeder misrepresenting Shulchan Aruch. Tainus a nidcha. If someone's a chayla, if someone's a muberes, it's different. But for a regular person, to misrepresent the halacha that is, and it's not just to say you don't have to undermine. In other words, let's say somebody's speaking about halacha. To tone it down of the severity that it is also a misrepresentation. You can't do that. Okay, so now the kasha is, so Moshe asked, what do you mean? The Gemara says in Megillah, the Ma'aseh B'Talmei HaMelech, where he commissioned 72 Chachamim, or 70 Chachamim, and they were Meshaneh. So he gives two answers. He says, there it was Min HaShamayim, it was Baruch HaKodesh. Hashem divinely facilitated that whatever changes they made. And then the second answer seems to be very reasonable. And the second answer is, they didn't change anything. They changed the halacha. They didn't change the halacha. They just said, instead of Bereshis, bara Elokim, bara Bereshis, so he doesn't misread it. But they're not changing any understanding of a mitzvah, any understanding of a halacha. The halacha is being presented as is. It's just they're changing the word formations in order that he doesn't get a misunderstanding of the Torah. And that's okay.
Change our Rebbe.
What?
Change the name of our Rebbe.
Right, but they change it to a four-legged creature. So they're not saying, no, you can eat an arneves. They didn't say you're allowed to eat the arneves. They just said the Torah is not stating the specific animal. Okay. Rav Moshe uses this Yam Shel Shlomo in a very interesting way. At weddings, so the way we do Kiddushin is we do Kiddushin with Kinyan Kesef. So it's interesting, by the way. I've never been to a wedding where the man whips out of his pocket a $100 bill, hands it to her. Hareyat Mekudeshes Li Bekesef Zu, like it says. We're not actually Mekadesh Bekesef. We're Mekadesh B'Shava Kesef. Why a ring? A ring is very interesting. A ring, it's one of the only halachos in the Ramah that are based on the Zohar HaKadosh. A ring is based on the Zohar HaKadosh. Okay. So you have something in the non-Jewish world, you have something called a dual ring ceremony. After all, everybody has to be equal. Unfortunately, Nebuch, there was a chasana recently where first the girl went around the guy, and then the guy had to go around the girl. Stam. Stupidity. But it's worse than that. What about a dual ring ceremony? Is a woman allowed to give a man a ring at the wedding? So I'm not getting into whether the appropriateness of a man wearing a ring, is it leisilbash at the wedding itself? Could a woman give a man a ring? So Rav Moshe says it's asur. It's asur. Now why is it asur? So Rav Moshe says two unbelievable reasons. Really remarkable reasons. The first reason is like this. The halacha is that after a person comes out of a mikvah, not talking about a man's mikvah, a woman's mikvah, when a woman is matar herself for real isser, then she doesn't use mayim she'uvim. She doesn't take the shower. It's gzeir d'Rabbanan. Why? Lest people say, I wasn't tahar, I'm partially tahar after the mikvah, and I'm completely tahar after the shower. And then people are going to say, well, if I'm completely tahar after the shower, then it must be the shower is what does it, and people are going to think you could take a shower, or take a bath. Says Rav Moshe, the very same reason why we don't use mayim she'uvim after a mikvah is the same reason why a woman cannot give a man a ring after the Kedushin. Why? Because then people are going to think the Kedushin was not complete until the woman gives the man the ring, and then people are going to think that no, the Iker is the woman giving the man the ring. And there says Rav Moshe, but yeah, we're living in the year, whatever year he wrote this, 1969, and we don't make new gzeros. Once the Shas was closed, the Chacham don't make new gzeros. So it's not a new gezerah. It's the same gezerah of not taking a shower after a mikvah is the gezerah of not a woman not giving a ring after the kedushin. It's the same takana. Big chiddush, same takana. It's a rachag mizrach umar. No, it's the exact same parallel. But then Rav Moshe says an amazing thing. Rav Moshe says, even if goyim do it, it's chukos ha'amim. But even if goyim don't do it, says Rav Moshe, it's an Isser Gadol for a woman to give a man a ring after the Kedushin. Why? Why is it Isser Gadol? Because if the Rabbanan allow a woman to give a man a ring after the Kedushin, people are going to forget a halacha. They're going to forget the halacha that a man ki yikach ish isha v'loi ki silakach isha le'ish. And anything that is done which will cause people to forget halacha is an Isser Gadol, and according to the Yam Shel Shloimoi, is a Hareg Ve'al Yavar. So Rav Moshe says, for a Masader Kedushin, to allow a woman to give a ring to a man is a big Avera. Big Avera, oh, what's so bad? What's so bad is, it's something which is Goyreim Shikchas HaTorah. And anything that we allow but it's not one of the big three, but every halacha is important. Every halacha is Misinai. Every halacha is part of the Torah. And the same way if someone is koifer, and even one small halacha, they're a koifer b'Torah. So if the Chachmei Yisrael allow a halacha to be forgotten, it's devastating. So I thought, perhaps, maybe that was the position of Rabbi Zecharia ben Avkulas. In other words, our question was, what did Rabbi Zecharia ben Avkulas hold? It seems to have made a terrible blunder. Rabbi Zecharia ben Avkulas, the Chachamim wanted to be makriv the korban. Rabbi Zecharia ben Avkulas said, Yoimru bali mumen kreven. Yeah, but it's the Jewish people's life is on the line. What was he saying? Who cares if people are going to say bali mumen kreven? Who cares? But it's not one of the big three. You don't have to give up our life. We have to give up our life so people don't say bali mumen kreven. So I believe Reb Zecharia ben Avkulas held like the Yam Shel Shlomo, like Rav Moshe, and I think what we're going to have to struggle to explain is, why was he wrong? Reb Zecharia ben Avkulas held that if word gets out from the Beis HaMikdash that the rabbis allowed a korban with a mum to be brought, people are going to say you're allowed to be makriv a korban with a mum. And so what? But Jews are going to die. It doesn't matter. You can't allow a halacha to emanate that's not correct. It doesn't matter how major, it doesn't matter how minor. Every minor halacha, you don't have to give up your life to fulfill the halacha. But you do have to give up your life not to disseminate a wrong halacha. And if being makriv of this korban will disseminate a halacha, that you're allowed to be makriv of a korban with a mum, then says Reb Zecharia ben Avkulas, let the Jewish people disappear, but let not one halacha in the Torah disappear. And guess what? The Chachamim said, you're right, Reb Zecharia ben Avkulas, we forgot the Yam Shel Shlomo. That's how I understand this Gemara. I don't know that anybody says this, but I have no other way to understand the opinion of Reb Zecharia ben Avkulas. The problem, though, is, but Reb Zecharia ben Avkulas was wrong.
You can't say there was a Rosh Hashanah.
What?
Was it? That they could have made it outspread.
In other words, why was he wrong? Why was he wrong? Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with that. In other words, to disseminate a halacha, for somebody to give a shiur, for the chachamim to teach the Romans, the halacha is that when we damage you, we're chayiv. That would be disseminating a wrong halacha. Apparently, the Shas understands that the Chachamim would have been licensed under the circumstance to be makriv this korban, even though word might get out that Yoimru Bali Mumen Kraven, because it would have been understood that there's a qualification over here, that it was a limited circumstance, that the Jewish people's lives were on the line because this guy Bar Kamsa, he sent a carbon and he was Matal Amum, and in order to save ourselves under these specific circumstances, we had no choice but to makav the carbon. Yoimru Bali Mum, in other words, it sounds like they could have done, what is it called? Control? The damage control, what's it called? Damage control, that's the whole thing? Damage control, right?
Control the narrative.
What?
Control the narrative.
Yeah, they could have contained the situation. In other words, to give shiur to the goyim that we're chayiv when we damage you, that's promulgating a false halacha, it's Zecharia v'al yava. To allow women to give rings to men at a chasana, that's Zecharia v'al yava, according to Rav Moshe. Because then people are going to forget the halacha that the man gives the ring to the woman. But as a one-time measure, now, it's interesting. The lashon of the Gemara is an v'sanusa shel Rav Zecharia ben Avkulas. I think we mentioned this at Shalshus recently. Yeah. Well, how is it humility? It's humility of Rav Zecharia ben Avkulas. It's maybe lack of understanding. Maybe it was lack of chachma. So basically, there's a famous piece in the Maritz Chios where he explains that the anivos is that he should have had the courage and the confidence to take it on his shoulders, to say, you know what, I understand the situation, I understand that the ramifications of the situation would be limited only to this case, and Klal Yisrael would not be mistaken in their assessment of the situation, and as a Hayrah Shah, he uses the words, as a Hayrah Shah, Rav Zecharia ben Avkulas should have taken it upon himself to take responsibility, take it as on his shoulders, to issue a ruling that under this circumstance we need to be makriv the carbon out Eis Lasas Hashem Heifiru Tarsach. In other words, comes out there's a very fine line, because there is a concept of Eis Lasas Hashem Heifiru Tarsach. There are very challenging circumstances where you could bend the halacha, and yet the Yam Shoshomo is saying that to misrepresent the halacha is one of the big three you have to give up your life for. So you would have to differentiate between stating a halacha black and white, which you can't misrepresent even a little bit, or establishing a practice permanently, which you can't deviate. In other words, people, could we do this? Could we do that? You can't do anything that will cause a halacha to be weakened or misunderstood or misrepresented. But it does seem like, as a one-time measure, if somebody has the azus to kedusha and the confidence, they would be permitted to do such a thing. So really, I think we've successfully explained the shita of Zecharia ben Avkulas, and we understand why it was a very difficult situation for him personally, and the Chachamim ultimately went along with him. But the Gemara does criticize that they should have realized that under the circumstances, the halacha needed to be bent. Okay, Rabbi say,
Why doesn't You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.